Okay. Well, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. Thank you for joining us for this, our second series, our fourth series, and our second session in our fourth series of the Kylemore Book Club. So a warm welcome to you all, our regular participants. Great to see you on the call and great to have you back for this series. And for those of you who are new, a warm Keed Mila Falcha. You're most welcome to join us for this series, which is entitled Anticipatory Innovation, Capitalizing on Change in Turbulent Times. My name is Lisa Caulfield, and I'm the director of the Notre Dame Global Center here in the west of Ireland. And I'm not from my accent, you can tell. I am not Irish, I am Canadian, but I've lived here for 17 years, and I have three little Irishmen that I cater to in between Zooms during this pandemic time that we've had. We're still working from home in Ireland in level 5 lockdown, and the schools are all out at the moment. So we have homeschooling to contend with between the Zoom calls. Last week, we started the new series, and this week we're continuing it with to act with resilience. To date, we have about 1,200 registered participants who are joining us from about 25 countries from around the world and who have registered on the ThinkND platform. I want to, as I always start off each of these sessions, to thank the sponsors of the Kylemore Book Club who really have made this a reality. In particular, Notre Dame International, the Keough Naughton Institute for Irish Studies, the College of Arts and Letters, the Keough School of Global Affairs, Notre Dame Learning, the Mendoza School of Business, and of course, the Notre Dame Alumni Association, without whom this could not be possible. Just a minor change from our previous sessions that we've had for the book club. Instead of doing a breakout session in the middle of our hour, we're going to leave it to the end. This will provide you an opportunity to meet with other of the participants to discuss the work that we listened to and share your reflections of what you have heard today. So I hope that you can stick around, and I've gotten some great feedback from those of you who have stuck around and met with the other participants who have joined. It just gives you an opportunity to share, and what is really at the core of this series is to build community in a time where we can feel quite isolated. Right now, I'm going to ask Zoe or actually it's the chat function that we're using. So if you can just use the chat function for any of the questions that you may have for my guest, then we'll be sure to try to answer them, and as many as possible given the time constraints of the hour that we have. But if we do not get to your question, I want to encourage you to please go to our LinkedIn discussion board that we have through ThinkND. It's called the Kylemore ThinkND book club on LinkedIn, and I've seen many of you post great stories, great ideas for other things that we can listen to, or great articles to engage with. So I encourage you to become a member of the LinkedIn group and to post questions there so we can continue the discussion. So it is with great pleasure today that I welcome Dr. Melvin Dowdy for this live Zoom session, and thank him for his introductory videos on his contribution to the book club series. This particular session is to act with resilience. And just a little background of Mel. He has served as a program faculty for the executive education program in the Mendoza School of Business at the University of Notre Dame since 2009. Prior to Notre Dame, Dr. Dowdy served in numerous positions at Bon Secours healthcare system. He has spent 15 years as an internal consultant with the company, including 5 years as a bioethics consultant. In 2009, he retired from Bon Secours as the executive director for the Center for Organizational Excellence. For the last 40 years, Mel has been a practicing clinical and counseling psychologist, providing psychotherapy services to adults and their families. Over the years, he has developed particular interest in value-based leadership, the integral approach to leadership development, the leadership spirituality, and the leader's role in cultivating organizational conditions for ethical integrity. He has coached senior leaders from a range of industries, including banking, financial management, human resources, and healthcare. Mel's coaching clients include Fortune 500 companies, family-owned businesses, political and educational leaders, law firms, and medical practices. We are really lucky to have Melvin, who teaches on our own executive program entitled Inspirational Leadership at Kylemore. He saw the magic and wonder of Kylemore very early on, and has proven to be someone who really understands and the sacredness of space that is there, and he has contributed significantly to the development of our inspirational leadership programs. And I can't thank him enough for the work that he has done over the years in developing this program. He's also greatly contributed to his time for this series and for promoting our leadership resources. And Zoe's just sharing some of the free leadership resources that we have as part of our inspirational leadership program, in which you can read further articles that Mel has written for us, and gives you an insight into the work that we do at Kylemore. So without further delay, I'd like to thank Mel for joining us, and I'd like Dr. Dowdy to please give us an introduction to Act with Resilience, and a bit about his poetry that he has written.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and thanks so much to Notre Dame International and all the sponsors for making this possible. It's always been a great honor to be associated with Notre Dame, with its creativity, its innovation, its wonderful community. So to all of you, thank you, and a blessed Ash Wednesday to those of you who are able to celebrate it wherever you are. I'm going to take my time to make a few comments about resiliency and what I mean by that word, especially in the context of innovation and change. Then I want to move on to some specific elements of the practice of resiliency that we talked about through the poems I shared with you, and certainly through the book I wrote. And then I might summarize my comments by reading one poem that really is offered in great honor and respect for all of the essential workers and medical emergency workers, and people who have helped us get through this time of tremendous stress and change. But first, how I define resiliency. You know, the popular definition of resiliency is the capacity to bounce back to previous levels of functioning when you've been under a long period of stress or trauma. The assumption that is being made is that many of us, when we're under stress, we tend to regress to previous levels of functioning, or we don't quite think as well, feel as well, connect as well with other people. Resiliency means that capacity to bounce back from that lowered functioning, returning to previous levels, or even to grow through our experience to higher levels of functioning. And I would basically agree with these definitions. But there's something different about resiliency the way I want you to think about it. It isn't really a static capacity. It isn't something that we develop like a muscle. It's really a behavioral pattern, a set of actions, a way of living that we discover in the context of stress, trauma, and lots of change. And if we develop and discover those patterns of life and make them a regular part of who we are and the way we approach life, then we prepare ourselves for the next time a large amount of change or trauma or stress comes upon us. And so I tend to approach resiliency as a way of life and not a static capacity. Now I take my approach from acceptance and commitment therapy, which is part of the research that Stephen Hayes and his colleagues have made over the last 30 years. If you want to know more about acceptance and commitment therapy, go online, Google that, you'll find it. Or you can go to the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science. And there are many articles by Stephen and his colleagues, as well as specific things about leadership, about organizational life, that you may find of interest there. The three core elements that I used from that model are present moment awareness, willing acceptance, the transcendent self, and the choice of a life direction to which we are 100% committed. So let me take a few moments just to talk about each one of those, because when I introduced them during the pre-recorded poems, I didn't spend much time there. Present moment awareness. What we're asking ourselves to do is to learn to be honest with ourselves, with our colleagues, with our co-workers about what has actually happened in the here and now as it is happening. That means to be really transparent, not denying, not covering up, not sugarcoating any of the stress that we're under, not trying to prematurely reassure people that somehow all of this is going to pass overnight. We saw much of the leadership of the world struggle with whether or not we were going to be presently aware and honest and transparent about what was taking place. And perhaps our president was least among those in the world who was willing to do that. If we want to build resiliency in our organizations and through our leadership, we really have to be in the present, transparent, not covering up, not sugarcoating, but really helping people embrace what is. Then comes willing acceptance. What are we to do with what is? The tendency that we have is to pick and choose that part of the stress we are experiencing, our reactions to it, to pick and choose what we think we can handle and to push away the rest. When we deny ourselves the capacity to fully experience the broad range of thoughts, of feelings, of reactions, of experiences that are going on, we actually lower the information necessary to learn from the experience, to begin to see and have insights into what really is going on. Willing acceptance allows us the capacity to think about what's coming at us as, well, life's new information, life's new lesson, that if we accept it as a gift and look at it, we will discover new ways of thinking about who we are, what we stand for, what our organizations represent, and the vision we have of the life we really want to live together. Willing acceptance. And willing acceptance, again, has to be 100% committed. The third element is the transcendent self. And by that, I mean a way of stepping into our experience without blaming anyone, without should haves, could haves, would haves, if only, but what if, but rather to invite everyone to be part of the solution, to find a way of bonding ourselves together through understanding and compassion, to take a very wide range perspective of all the different views that people may bring to the stress or the problems that we are facing. When we do that, we find that we are not defined by our past. We're not defined by the stress we're under. We're rather defined by our connectivity. And that's why we call it this transcendent self. And then last but not least is choice. Choice about committing ourselves to a path of action that asks us to behave in ways that are intrinsic to our sense of mission, purpose, and life orientation. One of the things I tried to say in my previous comments was that when I read the poems, choice is so different from decisions. I've made many decisions in my life, weighing the pros and the cons, trying to minimize the risk of each of them, and trying to get the best I could out of that decision. I've made only a few choices because choices will define me for a lifetime. Decisions can be right or wrong. I can regret what, I can undo them, etc. But a choice is life definitional. To belong to an organization, to create an organization, to decide to lead and stand up for something that you truly believe in, to have a vision of the way life can be. It's a commitment that deserves 100% of us. We don't look back. I like to think in the scripture, in Lot's life, who looked back and turned to salt. my advice is don't turn to salt. Stay 100% committed. Keep looking forward to the outcome of your life and your life's work, to the organization that you represent. It's life's work stands for something. Notre Dame stands for something. And when all of us are long gone and no longer around, we can point to the contribution we made to the way Notre Dame changed the world. Now, we make goals on the way to reaching our vision. So I once had the goal that I would at least be an effective therapist. I never knew that I would ever be a leadership consultant. I inherited that. But I knew that to get there, I needed to have education. So getting a PhD at Duke was just a goal. Okay. And I was committed to that. It was a good decision, but it was a goal. It was not the choice. The choice was to give my life to this work. The other analogy I like to make is I was never ready for my wife, Bonnie. We've been married for 48 years. Lisa has had a chance to meet Bonnie. But she was simply too wonderful not to commit my life to her. Yes, there were other choices. Yes, there were other ways that she could have gone. And she once told me, she says, I really don't need to be married to you. She explained to me once. And I said, well, but at least you've made the choice to be. And we have lived it out for 48 years. That changed me. That reshaped who I am as a human being. And therefore, when 5 years ago, my wife suffered a spinal cord stroke from the waist down, she was paralyzed. We didn't know if she'd ever walk again. Our life was thrown up like confetti. We were in such tremendous stress. And that's when I started to survive. I said, I've got to make present moment awareness my constant goal. And I've got to learn how to sit in the midst of this stress. And out of that, to accept whatever I'm experiencing. And I would write about it every morning. And doing that, I began to form a new vision of where our life together would go. And that's where the poems came from. That's how I came to write 185 poems, 30 of which are in this book. And we chose 30 that might be most illustrative of the whole concept of resiliency. So about a little bit over a year ago, as I was coming to the end of the poetry that would enter this book, I began to appreciate the springtime, and in particular, all the wonderful people who are making my life possible. Amanda, who's a physical therapist, has become a member of my family. Bonnie and I love her. She just found a wonderful partner. They have had a child together. But all the people who made our life happen, at one time we had more food in the refrigerator than we could possibly eat. We were giving away as much as we were eating, but we had such support. But for all the people who supported us, supported you and your families and your organizations across these last several years of COVID, I wrote a poem called, Did You Notice Forsythia? In honor of them, I'll read that to you, and that will end my comments, Lisa. Did you notice Forsythia? Oh, by the way, comment, Forsythia in the United States, when it blooms, it tells you spring is here. It's the first thing that happens. And when the yellow blossoms of forsythia come out, it means it's time to prune. Everything has to get ready for the rest of spring. Okay, so did you notice forsythia? Did you see her walking, supple, swaying, tall, and lean? Among Yoshimo cherries, azalea admiring her, as she runs along the footpath beside the lake in springtime's labor, birthing, vibrant, lusty. From the garden, she welcomes morning, conducting a stanza of the Hallelujah chorus along the freeway. Hiding behind the house, she plays wedding games with a flush of green lilies and Lenten roses. Did you hear the standing ovation echoing from city balconies to the Appalachian roadside. Nature's magnificent community bursting with appreciation. Life refuses to shelter. Beauty will not stay in place. So that is my formal comments. Lisa, I turn the microphone back to you.
Thank you, Mel. Appreciate what sort of kind of humility it is to read your own poetry too. So thank you for the selections that you chose for the series and for the readings that you gave us. I have a few questions for you that I prepared in advance, but I would also like to encourage those of you who are on the call today to send some questions into the chat function, and we can engage with Mel directly. I'm going to start off with bringing this to Irish poets a bit, Mel. And I have a quote from Seamus Heaney. And it says, I can't think of a case where poems change the world, but what they do is they change people's understanding of what is going on in the world. And that's a quote from Seamus. And I was just thinking about, your talk about resiliency and your work on poetry is kind of a higher level of kind of consciousness and awareness of what is going on in the world, and your ability to articulate it so succinctly and so carefully. I'd like to ask you, like, have you been influenced by Irish poets, and have you found, the Irish poets in the terms of resiliency effectual in your own contemplation of what is inspirational?
Well, of course I have. Who is not read Seamus? But in any case, he wrote a wonderful poem that had its title, which is "Had I Not Been Awake." Had I not been awake, and I encourage you to read the poem. But it's really a way of saying all that can be missed if I don't wake up. And waking up is something that poetry and reading poetry and writing poetry does to one. It is like sometimes the analogy I would put is when I read Seamus, I feel like someone just put me onto a massage parlor's table and started working on me and loosening up and opening up aspects of myself that I sometimes didn't know were there, or that I was too tense or blind or wrapped up in my own ego to notice. I love his writing. Also, I mean, lately I have spent a fair amount of time with John O'Donohue because of his wonderful embracing of Celtic spirituality and reading his poetry. The most wonderful book that's a collection of his conversation, Walking with Wonder, is a wonderful read, easy read. You can also get it on Audible as well as in book form. And of course, the last time I was in Dublin, I spent a good part of the day in the library there with the Keats exhibit that was there. I think it may still be there, I'm not sure. But you could spend, you could go back time and time again and realize something that you'd missed about him and all that he wrote about and had to say to us that's worth listening to. But yes, many of the poets, and there's a long list of Irish poets that I've tried to spend time with.
Well, I suppose we in the west of Ireland would have a strong affinity to the likes of John O'Donohue and to Seamus, who spent quite a lot of time in Ballynahinch Castle and wrote a lot of his poetry out west. But getting back to your resilience practices and what you wrote in the beginning of the book about to be fully present in the moment and how important present moment awareness is in the building of resilience. And accepting what is the first step can also be the hardest, right? Have you tips that you can suggest for living in the present and invoking awareness?
Well, you know, mindfulness and mindfulness practice is very popular in our culture these days. It predates us by hundreds of thousands of years. Uh, the wisest teachers about present moment awareness and of living a mindful life, uh, first of all, is to learn to notice what you notice. You know, if you just spend the next week saying, okay, all I'm going to do is notice what I'm noticing. Uh, what happens to you is you suddenly realize there are things that you attend to more than others. And what about them draws you there? It also begins to inform you, what are you missing? What are you noticing? And then are you noticing the experience itself of noticing, or are you noticing your commentary, which is the background noise, judging, criticizing, comparing, evaluating, problem solving? Uh, and so the first things in developing that practice is to notice the difference between the problem solving mind and the mind that we would call in the ACT community the sunset mind, where you learn to see and appreciate the beauty of what is right there and immediately in the here and in the now. Uh, so to begin the practice, I would say for someone who's not used to it, notice what you're noticing and notice the difference between when you think about it versus when you experience it.
Well, you do an exercise with this as well, where it's a lot of journaling, right, and reflection, and that's a kind of tool that I've encouraged our students to adopt is just to carry around a journal and to notice, you know, write it down, and it sometimes helps to put what you're noticing into the present moment and giving it context. So I found that exercise to be very helpful. Is just having that journaling outlet to
And if you're not particularly verbal, take a sketch pad. And if you don't like to write, take a camera. I've had people take recording devices into the forest. Whatever helps your senses tune in to what is there.
So I have another question that has come out, and we talk about this about kind of in leadership, like kind of the adaptive versus the innovative leader. And one of the questions that has come through from the audience is, what outlet can creative arts such as poetry provide to us as people, as leaders, as employees? So I guess that's touching a bit about how to move from, I suppose, the adaptive leader to the more innovative leader, and how we can use our creative devices to do so.
Well, one of the things that I did when I was at Bon Secours, we were trying to create sort of a basic statement of our promises to our patients. And so we had about 50 different quality managers out in our system at that time. This is Richmond. We had 4 hospitals and 50 quality managers across 4 hospitals. And so we contacted all of them and said, we want you to start writing about your first loves, or the person that you love the most. And don't tell us who it is. It might be a secret, but would you send us notes about love and falling in love? And then we posted them all. And then we gathered everybody together for a meeting, and we started picking and choosing the love phrases that were in what everybody had shared with us. And from that, we created verbal statements of how we wanted to relate to our patients, how we wanted them to feel that we had fallen in love with them, that we cared about them, that we were present to them with that level of attention. And for many years, our little list was like a short poem. And it was an innovation of getting people to write, to express, to give verbal images and visualizations of something that they felt that we then wanted to target towards how we actually serve the people we called our patients.
In the book, we also talk about like kind of the resilience practices, right? And you describe in the beginning, like listening to our experiences, or like really listening. And the Benedictines have a wonderful quote, if I'm saying Benedict, of listening with the ear of the heart. So really paying attention to your surroundings and really giving yourself over to the experience that you have when you're speaking with someone. So just when you take into like that practice, that resilience practice of listening to our experiences as to who we are becoming and the quality of life we intend to lead. Can you talk about that vision that you mentioned, like this commitment to a vision, and you briefly chatted about it with having a goal versus a vision. Just so what sort of tools would you say for committing to this vision of life that you want to lead? Because I think a lot of times we live a life that we're not exactly in the vision we had for it.
Well, I mean, there's the individual leader who's got the task of understanding what will my leadership across a lifespan mean to the world. And then there are the organizations that they lead and the role they have in trying to get those collective groups to actually create such a vision. The first tool I would say is, do you have some sense of inner calling? Is there some reason that you need to be a leader? If you don't have to be a leader, you could do something else. Uh, uh, if you write, must you write? If you sing, must you sing? What is it within you at the deepest possible level that you can articulate that says, I must be about this. I must stand for this. I must embody what in my life? We can't embody everything. For me, embodying understanding, compassion, hope has been a big enough a task that there are other things I will not do. But I know that I have to do that. I know that that's part of what defines me. Now, the vision is where are the choice points in my life that I can foresee where I have the opportunity to embody that, to live that out? What are the platforms that I need to have in which my leadership has the greatest opportunity of impact? Am I willing to occupy those places? If you read Martin Luther King's Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, you get a sense of his understanding of what the mission of his life was and of the places and the platforms he had to occupy and where he wanted the other ministers of the other congregations to come to him and join him in that work. So the first tool is to listen deeply to what your life is calling you to be, and to dare to be that. The second thing I would say when you get into a collective is to ask the organization, is there any reason why we must exist? If Notre Dame didn't exist, would it be a loss, and why? Why must Notre Dame be? That's the answer to its life vision, because that is the impact it's going to make in this world. Why must this team, take a small team, why must this team be? For what purpose? How does it actually serve the continuation of the mission of this organization? Or is this team superfluous? Is it an add-on? Is it an afterthought? Is it a kind of a way of making some group of people feel important, but it doesn't really add any value to who this organization is? So why must something be? That is where the sense of vision and choice come. Back to decisions can be made or not made, made and unmade. Choices define us, who we are.
You teach in our ILK program about polarities. And last week we read an article about full spectrum thinking that really talks towards, this kind of categorization that we put people in. And I feel like your exercise on polarities actually helps us to reconcile the kind of, worlds that we live in these categorical boxes. I wonder if you don't mind today to just describe a bit of the work about polarities and the exercises you sometimes ask of participants, and then perhaps explain how polarities model fit into what you have to say about, to act with resilience.
So a polarity is not two opposites. It's rather two complementary dimensions of something that work together for a larger outcome. So if those of you who are online have not already heard this particular example, we must have a fair amount of rest in life to balance off the amount of activity. If we have so much activity that we don't have time for rest, sooner or later, overvaluing activity at the expense of rest will exhaust us, and we'll be doing nothing but resting because we'll have injured ourselves. Something not healthy will happen. The opposite is equally true. If I spend too much time and I decide to sleep 15 hours a day at the neglect of the activities I need to do, well, there's a lot that won't get done. And sooner or later, I'm going to pay the price for that. So a polarity is a dynamic of things, like breathing in, like breathing out, like taking in oxygen, giving out carbon dioxide. It's a dynamic interaction of two different things. When it comes to resiliency, one of the things that I would say, especially in our Western culture, being and doing are so out of balance. We spend so much time doing at the expense of being that we exhaust ourselves and that we lose the purpose for which we think we're doing these tasks. We lose a sense of the direction or back to the choice. And that becomes another stressor. Then add on something comes along and says, okay, now figure out this complex problem, but you've long ago lost the capacity to just be, that now you're overwhelmed and your sense of being grounded in who am I? What am I about? What is my sense of mission and purpose in life? Being must balance with doing. Nor do I think leaders need to go to some ashram or monastery and forget being in the world. We've got to be engaged, and leadership is often measured by the results of what you do. But it also has to be understood by the impact of who you are on the being side. So the first thing is, can being and doing be balanced? Can I spend as much time performing, getting results in my organization as I've spent learning? Learning and performance need to be balanced. In this COVID environment, I've been talking to Amazon, I've been talking to different places. What are you learning about your business that you didn't ever do and that you're going to need to learn how to do? Okay, there's a whole new learning curve in this stress that we've been going through. And if we neglect the learning, but we just keep trying to perform and perform and perform, we're going to be out of date by the time COVID is over. Our practices as leaders and as organizations will already be out of date. If you just take a look at what's happening along the delivery systems, unbelievable changes are taking place along delivery systems, supply chain work. So we've got to learn in the midst of a stressor, as much as we try to perform and deal with the nature of the stress that we're up against.
I have one comment and then two questions from the audience, but I would say that what COVID has forced those of us who were caught up with doing is how much was spent on that, just filling the calendar, and how much time we needed to be more involved with being and more intentional in the choices that we made. And it, that sort of hamster wheel that we've been on of just kind of saying yes to everything, and including travel or be it, but really causing us to pause and reflect on what is essential travel, what is essential commitments, what is, at what cost were we caught up in the process of doing. Okay, from Mary, a question. Would you say symbiosis, like in the natural world, is an example of polarity? Also, are you influenced at all by Ignatian awareness principles? You are so speaking my language.
Yeah. Well, at least one of the things that I have learned in, in symbiosis, the boundary never really disappears. I have a twin sister. Okay, so every now and then somebody who doesn't know anything about genetics will ask me, well, are you identical? I say, I have a twin sister. Okay, so we're not identical, we're fraternal. It's the joke in the family. But we were so connected throughout our life, always in the same classes, going through school at the same time. We both belonged to always to the same clubs, to the band, et cetera. So it was so many things that, and yet her view of life to this day, her way of looking at life is dramatically different from mine. And so there is this complementarity between us. Uh, she is very, very much capable of being, I would say in the traditional, a mystic, okay? And I've tended to be an activist. So in later life, I've become much more of a mystic, and now she's the activist, and we've traded spaces. So it's an example of this kind of symbiotic relationship, but the boundary is never lost. The only comment I would make about Ignatian spirituality is to say that slowing down before you try to solve the next part of the problem, slowing down. And what is the gift of this particular part that you're in? The discernment in the Ignatian tradition is not necessarily a lot of deductive reasoning. It's noticing again. And then trying to listen for the alternative voices that you weren't listening to until you slow down enough to hear them. In organizational life, I would say is so much about, are you willing to invite the person who's least likely to be heard in the organization, least likely to be seen, least likely to be valued, bring them into your leadership, into your office, into wherever you are, go where they are and ask them, I've been chewing on this problem. I don't know if I have an answer to it. Can you help me with it? And don't be surprised by the perspective that they can offer that you would have never, ever thought about. And that's very Ignatian.
It come to mind also about in marriage, right, where it's also quite good not to be attracted to the opposites, right, with because there's boundaries there, but then there's also kind of reflection and it kind of full circle coming together too. So this you can see that in relationships as well. I have a question from Eamon, whom you know, Mel.
Oh, Eamon, yes.
Has Mel noticed resilience diminish through the generations? Has there been a growth in entitlement in, say, high schools or colleges or with graduates?
That is an excellent question. As the first one was, it's also a great question. What I am noticing is, especially in the mid 20-year-old group, a lack of preparedness for understanding that life is hard. A tendency to feel life must be easier. Of looking for so much more of what I would call the hedonic fixes of life, rather than the eudaimonic joyfulness of life that is much slower in becoming, and much slower to live, and much slower to create and cultivate. And impatience that says, I've got to have this one and have this one. So lack of preparedness, first of all, a lack of patience, number two. And the third thing I would say is resiliency doesn't take the stress personally. The more resilient you become, the less you take it as some kind of condemnation or some kind of criticism or some kind of peeling back of how inadequate you've always been and now everybody knows. But I see a lot of the 20-some-year-olds that I see, especially in my therapy office here, struggling with taking the frustration, the stressor, somehow personally. And somehow it's all about them when it's really not. So yes, I do notice a difference. The other thing I would add to this is depending on the support systems around them, if they're rich, okay, their capacity to bounce back might be greater. They might be a little more willing to use the support systems that are around them than my generation was. And so there's a little bit of a contradiction here that they might just be able, if they can find a way to use that, if it's available to them, that they will bounce back faster.
A little follow-up to that, Mel. There is this sense of immediate gratification, though, in the younger generation, right? Because things have become so instantaneous. And I suppose with COVID, it's forced the decision to be, to not partake in certain entertainments or restaurants, or, to partake in social exercises that are our immediate gratification. And it's that kind of delaying of that builds resistance. So is a resilience is that you need to understand that, you have to delay gratification because it's essential for your safety at this point. But it's this culture of the immediacy of the now, of the moment. And we've been fed through that, through, technology and social media.
Yeah, I would agree.
This is from Paul, whom you also know. Most leaders focus on doing and results, as you mentioned. Where can a leader who wants to learn these practices and tools, resilience and polarity management, go to begin the process of mastering them for their benefit and the benefit of their followers?
Well, I think they need to come to an ILK retreat, which we're holding, as he knows, in 2022. There isn't a single place. There's certainly the work that I mentioned earlier of acceptance and commitment therapy. There are some acceptance and commitment therapists who've already dedicated their life to coaching into working in organizations, and you can find that on that website I mentioned, the Association for Behavioral Contextual Science. I think the first place to start is actually in yourself. What we teach at Notre Dame is an inside out, okay? So I would say go find within yourself those places within your life where you have learned something about how to pay attention. Maybe it was the birth of your first child. Maybe it was something that you created. Maybe it was that dissertation program. Whatever it was, go and find something that was your creation and where you really showed up and paid attention. What were the lessons that are embedded in that experience? Cherish them, write about them, reflect about them, go ask people who were there and gather that learning together. And the second thing I would say is look around and find as many polarities as you can that you are actually not managing well, and the cost of it, what's the cost of that for you? And experiment with trying to create a new balance and see what happens. Experiment, because you yourself, your life, the way you're living it, is always the best teacher. There's an old wonderful Asian saying, a Chinese saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. If we get ready, there are more teaching lessons already in our life than we may realize. But that's where I would go.
I think also we do this with immunity to change. Like we have big assumptions, right? So that's could prohibit us. We have big assumptions on our actions that they will falter, and so we tend to not experiment because we're fearful of the action or reaction that we'll have. But to your point, if you test your big assumptions, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be as bad as you think it's going to, as you think. Next question, very brief one. What is your relationship to beauty?
So of my 5 values that I live my life by, One of them is to appreciate and create and participate in beauty. I spent a whole year, 1 year, saying I will do nothing this entire year but notice beauty. And there's simply more beauty around me than I can describe. In this office, I think I can name 1, 2, 3. I have 8 paintings in this office. I have 3 sculptures in this in my office. In my home, everywhere you go, you will find works of art. My oldest son is a sculptor and a teacher of art, and the second oldest is a conductor. The Philharmonic in Minneapolis, I think he's done his 8th opera. I play guitar every day of my life. I try to write. I happen to be married to one of the most beautiful people you will ever meet. So I insist on having beauty around me all the time. But I would say the fundamental issue about beauty is what John Donahue says. In the beginning was beauty. Before the word was ever spoken, it was beauty. It was beauty. And if we're willing to actually let beauty speak to us, we learn that it is the means by which God is always, always speaking to us. Wherever beauty is, God is, sacred is, and lessons about what we need to learn to live our life.
Mary had another question, but I think you've sort of answered this on how do you have fun, and how, do you find
yes
fun in your creative impulses, I suppose, in the poetry and the work? Is that where you find joy?
Oh, I also find joy in listening to my wife in the Scrabble, my grandchildren, being with people who are really, really different from me, in non-serious settings, in play settings, and in settings where we are just able to socialize, have fun, cook together. I love, love, love to cook. And so every night I cook, and it can be a simple meal or it can be, take 3 hours. But Chef David's work is just like, I just can't get enough of what David has to say. But that's where I have fun.
And what do you say about uncomfortable situations and putting yourself in difficult situations? Have you advice on that to bring you into the acts of building resiliency? Have you an opinion of people who kind of seek that sort of uncomfortable space, or being in discomfort? Would that bring you to a more present awareness?
Well, yes. I seek them. Okay, so writing is one thing. Editing and then publishing is another. I will tell you that there were moments when putting this book together made me almost jump out of my skin. What's going to happen to it? And then I said, I'll just give copies of it to my family. The thought that there are now, I think, over 200 copies of this book out is the moments when it scares me. What's happening what is this conversation? But leaning into the discomfort of that creativity has now pushed me I'm starting to write in an entirely different style. I have a new poetry coach who's working with me, trying to get me to do things I've never done with words, with form, writing a sonnet. I've never written a sonnet in my life. I've tried. I write in free verse. But yes, leading into the discomfort zone is the only place of real learning. Otherwise, you're just practicing what you already know. Why not go there?
This is I guess a tough question, but you outline it. It's outlined in the introduction about suffering and suffering producing 3 different kinds of people. Those who are broken by it, those who are emerge stronger, but more determined in a way that it'll never happen again. So build these walls around it. And then the third way of dealing with suffering is with humility and bravery. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about of dealing with suffering in those terms, and how you yourself dealt with it.
So I grew up in a suffering family. My father, Melvin Sr., was killed when I was 2 months old. And so I grew up in a family that was grieving the loss of my father. I learned about grief and loss again when other events happened I won't go into throughout my lifetime. Uh, every time suffering came along, for me, because I was raised and born in the Christian world, that's been my lens through which I see the world. It's not the only lens, but it's been my lens. I've always understood suffering to be redemptive. There's something in suffering. And it's not meritorious suffering. It's like, if I suffer, then I'll finally get the ticket to heaven. Or if I suffer enough, I'll finally win some other lottery. No, it's like suffering reveals something to us about the sacred. It reveals something to us about our capacity for compassion, about the ways in which we need each other, the ways in which we can connect. And if I look to suffering as a lesson, as a gift, not as a burden, then I might just discover something that is wonderful, full of wonder. I will tell you that in the book, there is the poem about the woman in the ER whose first child, stillborn, had been brought to the ER, and I was brought into the ER to baptize or bless that child. That suffering was, for me, just a mark in my life. It changed me. The nurses who were in that room watching, the officer who contacted me later, the lives of these people have changed. I've not violated laws in terms of HIPAA or contacted the woman herself, because that's her privacy. But I imagine that it's changed her. So it's not if we suffer, it's how we suffer. It's the way we suffer that matters in terms of learning the gift of life and learning how to work and heal and be together.
Well, thank you so much, Mel. And I'm conscious of time. So that hour, once again, just slipped so quickly with your presence here. So thank you for this wonderful gift of Night Weavers and the book that you've been able to birth into the world. And now it's among us. And I wish you every success in the next set of poetry that you'll be working on. And I want to thank you sincerely of your time and your presence and always the wisdom that you impart. I, for one, am grateful for you and for the work that you've been able to accomplish and for what you've shared with us today and always. So we're going to offer the breakout sessions shortly. And just want to draw attention to next week's session. And again, I encourage people to share the series. We have the National University of Galway, the Carnes Business School professor, Alma McCarthy, who will be presenting to us what the impact COVID has had on Irish society. Emma will talk about a recent national survey that she conducted to reveal that perhaps the way we work from home or the way we work in general has changed forever. So please join us next week to hear about the Irish response to the COVID crisis and from the expert group that were working on the findings of a national remote work survey that was conducted with stakeholder consultations. And now we've actually seen here in Ireland, the government introduce a range of measures to support the continual work of remote working. So please join us next week and please share this the session with all who would be interested in the Irish condition. And lastly, Mel did mention our wonderful Chef David, who is has given of his time and offering this free kind of cook along on Friday evening. You just need to register on Eventbrite. It's free and online, and once you register once, you'll get the invitations for this. Due to a demand, I think, from people who joined us last week, the suggestion was biscotti. So not exactly Irish, but he's going to teach us Biscotti next this Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is 8 p.m. Irish time. So once again, thank you to Mel, and thank you to all of you who joined this evening, this afternoon, and this morning. We're going to break out into breakout sessions now, which Zoe will put you into, and just things to maybe think about in the sessions that we were, is just considering, ways that you've acted with resilience, or how you find yourself bringing yourself to present moment awareness, and accepting that could be the hardest step first, but if there's some tips that you've gleaned along the way to be more present and invoking awareness, that we would ask you to consider in your discussion. But according to the rules of civil discourse, so please share who you are, where you're from, and enjoy the time that you have together. And if I don't see you, then I'll see you next week, same time, same place, Wednesday.